You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. It is 2020 and I am so excited to be back for another year of shows. We've got a lot of great content scheduled for you this year. This episode, however, is going to be another Goth Talk episode to kick the year off. We're going to be chatting about music and the music community in general. We're going to talk about our favorite trends of 2019. We get into creator burnout a little bit, and yes, we do a deep dive on gatekeeping in the goth community. Our guest this month is Krystina. She's a singer from her band Loverload, and recently launched a talk show, interview show called Portland Undead, where she interviews local goths, musicians, artists, that kind of thing. I'll have links to both of those in the show notes, of course. So grab your favorite beverage and have a seat over there on the velvet couch. It's right next to the coffin. And don't mind Vlad. He only bites when you ask him to. So I hope the incense doesn't bother you because it's non-negotiable. All right, let's start the episode. When did you first realize you were goth, and how did that come to be?
Oh, that was an interesting time of my life. I realized that I was goth when I was middle school-ish. What is that? 8th grade. And there was this just one amazing girl that like transferred schools, and her name was Misty. And she was a goth, and she was like the first one that I had ever really encountered, because this is the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and which is not where I live any longer, thank God. But so long story short, Misty was a role model for me, and she was very goth and influenced my fashion choices. And along with the fashion choices came the music, and my mother was not pleased whatsoever. She tried to steer me away from that as hard as possible, and I was far too bullheaded. And then she, "Oh, Krystina, honey, this is just a phase." No, Mom, no, I'm gonna stick with it. I like it. It makes me happy. It's easy to match my clothes in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or conversely, it takes you 30 minutes to find that one shirt that you're looking for.
Oh God, right? Because it's in the massive pile of black laundry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but so I finally now, I would say, trained my mother to, if it's not black, I'm not going to wear it. So don't buy it. So when she does buy me clothes now, because, you know, moms do that sometimes, it's always black, and thank God. It's been a journey with my mom.
Is she comfortable now, or she still gives you shit about it?
Yeah, she's accepting of it now, but for the most part, she's kind of like, I don't understand this makeup. You know,
sure.
Why would you tattoo your eyebrows?
Mm-hmm.
Bless her heart. I love my eyebrows, though. I think they're wonderful.
I'm sick of my parents enough at this point to just say, because God doesn't exist. just as an answer, you know?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, weirdly enough. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I haven't quite gotten there with my grandmother, at least. She's that sweet little Southern Baptist grandma, and I can't break her heart like that.
Yeah.
Everybody else, though, I don't care. Mom knows I don't prescribe to that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it was weird, actually. Just today, my son, I was going through my huge pile of black clothing trying to fold my t-shirts that are inside out. And my son came in and he was like, "Why is everything you wear black?" And he's literally never asked me that before. And so it was weird that he had this epiphany of like just realizing now. I was like, it's my favorite color. I feel comfortable wearing it. It's like, but you can wear colors that aren't black, right? And I was like, yeah, I know. It's like, I enjoy wearing it, and you feel comfortable wearing whatever you enjoy wearing. So that was a weird little interaction. But
how old is he?
He's turning 7 in a week. Yeah.
Mine just turned 5.
Oh. Well, we'll do the parent chat later because I feel like that's such a small part of the audience. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I did want to ask you about your local scene as well to get kind of a feeling for, I don't know how active you are, but like, what is it like out there? How many options for events do you have? How's the community, that kind of stuff?
Right. Well, first of all, the community. So I first started getting into the like bar scene for the goth community in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was very small, and very rarely did we ever have like shows come through. It was always mostly DJs.
Right.
So when I moved to Portland, Oregon, it completely blew my mind because I was immediately missing shows 10 years ago because I was not yet 21. And there was never a single show that I wanted to go to in Nashville. And now, I mean, I'm constantly buying tickets for shows. The scene here is incredible. There's always something going on. We have the Lovecraft bar. So if there's not a specific thing going on, you can go to the Lovecraft and hang out with the other goth kids that are, just having a chill night. Like, it's amazing. We also have the Church of Hive, which takes place at the Star Theater on Sunday nights. And we have Recycle at Tryst currently, and then there's another one, and I'm blanking on it, that is also not at Lovecraft, but there's most of the time there's always something going on at Lovecraft. So the scene is just, it blows my mind how active people are here. And the shows, I was actually just debating this with someone on Facebook earlier.
Debating
last
on
night
Facebook?
and this afternoon.
No.
How the ministry frontline assembly KMFDM show.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they're like, everyone's freaking out over this show, but nobody goes to shows for smaller local bands that are in the scene. And I'm like, I don't understand what you're talking about. We support everybody here in Portland, like shows are huge here. Like it's the heart of our scene. And it turned out they were in Richmond, Virginia. I thought they were local, but they were not. So it was a completely different beast over there. But
Trey, I don't know if you would agree with this. I think here the local bands get pretty decent crowds, but you do definitely fill up bigger spaces with touring acts.
Yeah, I'd say I agree for the most part. It's the big acts draw everybody out of the woodwork. But there are a fairly sizable number of regulars who go to almost everything. Or at least when I go to see a show, which I should go to more, but I do go to a fair number. I always see the same handful of people at every one, but not necessarily as many at the local bands as I would, when, as you said, Frontline or Ministry or whatever come through.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time when you do have the touring bands from out of the country, like the one that's coming to my head is the Zine show, but there's more examples of this. For that show, like the two opening bands were both local bands I'd never even heard of. So most of these big tour shows will have local bands playing, which is pretty neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say the last couple of semi-big bands that I've seen, I almost preferred the opening acts. They were more interesting.
Yeah.
Oftentimes.
So it's funny too, because for the Frontline Ministry KMFDM show, one of my friends, Vex March, who is the lead singer for Particle Sun, which is a killer show, killer music. Oh my God, I'm in love with them. But he wanted to open for that show, and everyone was kind of like, I don't know if they're gonna have an opener for that one particular, but like I want it to happen so bad. You know?
Yeah, and there's so many. I don't know if you've had any festivals over there, but festivals have become a big thing too. Like, most salient in my mind is what's going on in Tampa, because they just started a fest, Absolution Fest.
Yeah,
But it seems like those kind of big tent festivals are making a comeback the last few years.
yeah. So we were having, I think the last 3 years, if memory serves. We've been having Portland Industrial Goth Fest, Pig Fest for short.
Nice.
And it was devastating this year because the building that this was being held in, the roof flooded and then caved in.
Oh no!
Like 2 weeks before the show, or before the weekend, and so like it was a scramble to like get bands rescheduled at other venues. And I think they were able to reschedule most of the bands, but like some of them were just like, I'm a dropout. So
yeah,
that really hurt. We're hoping to. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
We're hoping to reopen it this next year at a different location. So
cool, good. Yeah, I was gonna ask what what kind of music generally gets played most often, or if it's a pretty even mix of like, goth, industrial, goth rock, dark wave, whatever.
Yeah, so at Pigfest particularly is a lot of industrial goth techno punk. We do get a lot of the classics, and then there's a little bit of everything kind of thrown in. Another thing that someone recently commented on our local Facebook page was that they're sick of hipster music like IMX being played. And I was like, oh, I feel personally attacked.
IMX have been around forever.
I am so in love with Chris Cornell.
And they're so creative.
Yeah,
their music is so good.
It's amazing. It might not be particularly, singularly goth, but it falls in there.
But it's like really creative.
90% of the people at the last show.
Kind of what makes them interesting is they're not they're not like a one-trick pony that just does the goth tropes.
Exactly. But yeah, so it's a pretty good mix. We have like an 80s night at Lovecraft. At Hive on Sundays at Star Theater, it's always we always have different DJs, so it's a constant ebb and flow of different genres. So
speaking of music, then, would you mind? I'm interested to know more about your band, because I have listened to some of your music since you were coming on, but I'd like to know a little about the project itself, and how long you've been involved with making music, and is that an important thing to you, and that kind of stuff.
So funny story that so I've always been involved with music since I was like 6 or 7. My grandmother had me in piano classes, and then I was in the high school marching band, and we took 5th place at nationals my senior year, so like I'm pretty high and mighty about that. But
nice. Yeah.
It's got to be hard with piano.
Oh, well, I play piano, flute, piccolo, baritone, and guitar. So yeah, I don't I can't do it half as good as I used to, but if I'd sit down and pick it up again and dink with it, I'm too lazy though. I'm so lazy nowadays. But so
lazy or busy with responsibilities.
Yeah, probably. That's the hard truth of it. But anyway, so Loverload started the night of the last show of Pigfest 2017, I think. I randomly got invited to a house party. It was John Litster. He's if you watch my YouTube, he was the first person that I interviewed. And then
Right.
we were at his house, and I just started talking to this random dude, and I was like, oh man, the show, watching the shows tonight, like it makes me want to do that. And he was like, well, let's do it. And I was like, I don't even know who you are. so he introduced himself to me.
So I got in his van and we drove off.
No, so he introduced himself to me as Yuri Thrall. And he was at the time the keyboardist for Die Robot, which is another amazing local band. I'm going to go see them next month. Actually, I'm stoked. They're going to be playing at the Planetarium. I'm very excited about that. But so we just kind of started hanging out at his house, and he introduced me to all of the equipment because I being classically trained, I don't know jack diddly squat about any of the equipment involved in making electronic music. And originally, I wanted to make industrial, but that's not where it led to. To be honest, I don't even know what I would really classify our music as. At first I was kind of thinking, oh, well, it's kind of maybe witch housey, but
I mean, I definitely hear a lot of industrial in it. Not as a primary factor, just sort of an undercurrent. Definitely a healthy amount of ethereal and shoegaze, though. That was heavily in there.
That's what my husband called it, and I don't disagree with that at all.
I mean, the sounds were too modern for it to be part of the whole, the wave, the synth wave, chill wave, etc. You had some pretty modern synth tones in there, which were a little bit more into maybe a trancey type thing, but your percussion, your rhythms were not, at least not electronic dance music.
No, people never danced at our shows, let me tell you. Except for this one person.
I danced to it.
We had this one guy. He would show up and he danced to everything. He was great. But yeah, it was definitely a stand there and enjoy the music while you're sipping your beverage kind of music.
Right. All right. So I did want to, if we can jump around a little bit, I do kind of want to talk about the gatekeeping stuff first. So get the idea of gatekeeping or boundary work is, in Goth at least, is always an issue. Like this, it constantly comes up. But I thought kind of touching on it going into 2020 would be useful. And there have been a spat of discussions about this. I know I linked in the show notes, there's a video from Ligeia Resurrected where she talks about her fear around not being seen as authentic when going to a goth club. I've seen some other YouTube videos about the term gatekeeping, and I've seen like conversations on Reddit and Facebook and that kind of thing. So I wanted to kind of look at a few different applications and aspects of this idea of gatekeeping, and this idea that of people telling other people that they aren't goth kind of thing.
Right.
But I guess in a general sense, Krystina, is there, I mean, if you want to talk elitism or whatever, however you want to phrase that, is that something that you have experienced in person or online at all? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I've experienced it a little bit online. Mostly people, oh, you don't know the birth date and location of the birth of your favorite musician, so obviously you're a fake goth. Like just that kind of extremist elitism kind of bit, and then obviously when I was a baby bat, as I was getting into it, some of the other kids were like, oh, you're just an emo, you're not a real goth. And I'm like,
yeah.
And granted, that was also like mid 2000s, early 2000s. So not even in my peripherals anymore, those experiences.
Right. Yeah.
But pretty much in person, in Portland, I've not experienced that. It could have to do with me having a consistent look and showing up to the scene on a basis regular enough for people to recognize me. One of my friends did recently, they threw a party and one of their friends was like, oh, well, I'm not a goth, so what if I just like put on some eyeliner and like a black shirt? And he's like, you're not a goth. Don't. And he's like, well, I just want to pick up some chicks. And he's like, especially if you want to pick up some chicks, don't do that because you're not a goth. But like that person is, I would classify them more as like a hippie. They hang out with that person who is a goth, but they're not into the music or the scene that much, and they typically wear like green, like army green. They've just never really exhibited goth until it was a factor of can it get me laid.
Right. Yeah, that's gross.
Yeah.
There's a thing going around on TikTok among goths where there's I don't know whose audio it is, but there's some like audio about getting a big titty goth girlfriend.
Oh God, yeah.
And so there's a thread going around where the goth women on TikTok play that song, but then just stand there and stare at glare at the camera.
Yeah,
it's pretty great.
Yeah, that is actually something that kind of bothers me because goth is kind of fetishized. I actually had a coworker who was like, "Oh, I just want to get me my big titty goth girlfriend," and I'm like, "You are so far from goth, like
so many problems happening.
Yeah, like
here.
You're a military tactical type person, and you can't expect." Everybody has different tastes, and I have seen wonderful relationships work where a girl has been a goth and the guy has not, or vice versa, but this whole manic pixie dream girl thing, like, yeah, that does really get under my skin, to be honest.
The two of the questions that came up in my mind were, is there an instance where we can actually tell someone they aren't goth? And if so, what is the criteria that we can use to say you aren't goth?
Perfect example is an example I gave a couple of minutes ago with I just want to get laid, and you've never exhibited an interest in the music or the clothing, or like you've never exhibited an interest in this until it presented the opportunity to get you laid. Using the scene as a some kind of gain, to be able to gain something from it.
Right, a means to an end rather than the end in and of itself. I can definitely, I can get behind that. I don't know if there's a good example in general where I'm most, I guess, uncomfortable seeing somebody claim to be goth, whether they are or not, is when I see them portraying themselves as goth and also as something that I view as not particularly healthy in the goth scene. Being like a goth involved in hate speech groups, or a goth involved in, violent whatever, governmental, whatever sort of activities, and trying to, or at least portraying those two items as conflated. As to be a goth, you must also be this. That's where I get a little bit less comfortable with people saying they're goth, but it's less about whether they're goth or not, because they could be goth. It's the fact that they're conflating something I view as, I guess, antithetical and or dangerous to the health of the movement, and somebody trying to conflate that with their gothness.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I want to get back to like talking about stuff I've seen online, but I think that's a really good point. And I think that's where part of where gatekeeping works, right? Because if we're thinking about goth, really, I was thinking clubs more, but even online spaces, if we're thinking about these as a safe place, you kind of by definition have to exclude people. So starting with, at minimum, like fascists and stuff like that is something that's worthwhile. And then, but I think there is a difference between like kicking normies out of a club to keep it a safe space versus telling off alternative people who want to be goth. But like I do kind of understand the desire to police goth spaces to keep them as those safe spaces. Like the whole thing with a safe space is so like in my life currently, I came out as non-binary to like basically everyone in my personal life, and it's been pretty exhausting to have to constantly like correct people on my pronouns, and I feel like I'm an imposition. I feel like I'm bothering people. I'm out of place. I'm struggling with a lot of like identity stuff. I feel just kind of exposed in general. And I feel like I always have to be ready with a detailed explanation or justification for existing in the world. Whereas when I'm with people that I know and trust, and I know that isn't an issue, it's really a huge weight off my shoulders, and it's affirming, right? So the same kind of goes for goth, because how many times have you has someone asked you what kind of music you're into, and you say goth, and then they bring up something that's not goth, and then now you're going through this calculation in your head of like, okay, how much do I care about this conversation? Am I going to try and bring up a well-known band that this person might know of? Am I going to try and get into a more substantial conversation about music and culture? Am I just going to nod and smile or walk away or what? So there's something to be said for being comfortable exploring and expressing your interests in a like-minded community. But there's like, it's not really that simple though, because with that gatekeeping kind of like, there's that scene in Gypsy 83, which I think really captures this fear that a lot of people have, where like maybe you're an experienced goth and you're talking to someone you don't know, and you throw out a reference that you assume they would know, but they don't know it. So now that person feels pressured to either nod along and maybe get caught in a lie later, or admit that they don't know what you're talking about and risk being made fun of.
Right.
And in that interaction, there's all this environmental context and body language, and it can be kind of overwhelming. So I think, like, in my experience in person, I think most people are sensitive and charitable and want to be helpful when that conversation takes place. And I think people are a little less charitable online.
Yeah, I would have to say people have a maybe perhaps a conflated ego online versus in person. Like,
yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah, like I like, for instance, on a, so the Lovecraft, our local goth bar, they were last year for 2019 voted the best place to dance in Portland. And yeah, so a lot of, you know, it promoted a lot more business coming in the doors, also including you know, not goths. So I have seen quite a bit of people talking about how it's not cool for these people to come into our space, and particularly they take up a lot of space on the dance floor and dance very you know, how you would normally dance at a normal club, like a top 40s club. But that's not really the way you do it at a goth club.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a lot of gatekeeping regarding that on Facebook, particularly. You know, honestly, the way I see it is they're coming in to support the bard that I love, and they're spending their money. So that's never a bad thing. But at the same time,
Yeah.
I do also understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, like particularly when the not Gothmen walk up behind a big titty goth girl and start grinding on them. That's incredibly inappropriate. But
That's time for the bouncer to do their job.
Right. Which, bless their hearts, we do have the greatest bouncers. I love them so much. You have a problem with someone, and they might be busy. They're not going to see everything, but you go up and you tell them, "Hey, look, I'm having a problem with this person." They're at least going to pull them aside and tell them, "Look, you got to stop." If not, just strictly kick them out immediately. And within our scene as well, we have a lot of people be allowed in the door out of what you would call dress code for a goth club, but generally they're very respectful. There is rarely a problem, and when there is, you hear about it on the PDX Goth Facebook group.
Yeah.
It's a whole big thing, but it rarely happens these days. And I think I also do have to thank just our city for that. The people within our city. They're like in Nashville, I would feel really uncomfortable walking down the street in my club outfit. Right? Like at 3 o'clock in the morning, walking down the street by myself.
Right.
But in Portland, I feel a lot more comfortable because the people here are a little bit more progressive, and they're not as, "Oh, you're a freak. You must worship the devil." So
I mostly agree with, how it's already been described. There's a sort of a mixed feeling about how people who aren't part of the scene, when they come into your club space, I'm mixed on it. I'm generally very positive towards it. I like to see different people experiencing it and seeing the scene and exploring it. But I do want them to kind of pull back from trying to interact with it in a way that's, maybe outside of the norms of our scene and some of the norms of theirs, be it the giant circles that people create on the dance floor to dance in groups, which is a pain in the ass when you're already crowded on the dance floor and they're taking up this giant amount of space, or the more egregious example is already mentioned, the random guy coming up to random girl and getting all up in her business without, being asked or any of that. So there's definitely some issues there, but as long as people come into the space, whether they look like they belong or not, as long as they're not basically getting in the way of everybody else having a good time, if they're in there with an honest view towards experiencing it without trying to impose their own norms on things, I'm all about anybody who wants to come in. Sure, you're welcome.
That was worded perfectly.
As it usually is when Trey opens his mouth.
And you don't stuff something in it.
Cemetery Confessions After Hours. So the next part of that train of thought was, if, have you been part of other communities or actively are part of other communities, and do they get into this elitist, anti-elitist debate, and how do they handle it?
Oh, Lord, the pagan community. There are two types. There's the type that's, follows very strict, it has to be done this way. Yeah. And then there's the type like wiping Cheeto dust off on their shirt.
God bless the chaos
let's do
mages.
This. That's me. Yeah. I feel like it's a lot more about intent than science.
Or like a strict
You know?
set of guidelines, right?
Right. Well, the science of the craft, like
Right.
it has to be done
Right,
exactly
yeah.
this way,
Right.
It's more about the intent that you
Mhm,
put behind it.
mhm.
But anyway, back onto subject. And then, oh Lord, so music, classical music. There was a lot of gatekeeping with that. I am dyslexic. I am so dyslexic. It is. I cannot. I can see the notes and read what notes are what on sheet music, but I can't make cohesive music reading the sheet music. I'm the type of musician that I hear something once and then I can play it. But so having dyslexia in that community is you get looked at like a complete fucking dumbass. Like, oh, obviously you don't know what you're doing and you haven't been studying this since you were 7 years old. And
yeah, there's definitely a primacy of the score over the sound. It's sort of the inverse of, say, a jazz community where it doesn't matter what it looks like on a piece of paper. It's how it makes you feel. It's how you move to it. It's how you groove with it. Classical music definitely has doesn't matter how good the orchestra is, when you pull open that score and you sit in that comfy chair, how do you hear the music as you peruse the notes?
Right. And then, another one that can be equally as toxic is, what is the word for that? Traditional artist scene with, painting and oil painting. And,
as far as the traditional mediums versus, say, computer graphics, animation, etc.
Right, because
yeah, I've definitely encountered that.
Yeah, it's painful too. Like that. Oh, because everyone interprets art differently, and everyone thinks that their way is the one right way.
Mm-hmm.
And well, maybe not everybody. I'm under the impression of if you felt something when you looked at it, that's good art.
Yeah.
But yeah, with so there's like when I was taking an art class when I was very young and impressionable, and it was supposed to be an abstract piece, and it was like a collage, I guess, where we were just gluing random shit to stuff. And the teacher's assistant came around and told me, "Oh, well, this isn't correct because there's more than one focal point."
Ooh.
And I looked at her, and even as a young child, I was like, you cannot tell me how to art.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a way to make that critique that's not so judgmental.
Yeah.
Where you discuss the importance of focal points and discuss the importance of how you're telling the story and how you're communicating.
Right.
But
within
the way
a
they
specific
said it
style
wrong.
and context. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I was.
Well, I mean, it's not even that. It's not judging it in the, oh, this is wrong. It's like, okay, I can see what you're doing here. Here's sort of the downside of having so many focal points. Or how are you, what are you communicating? How are people supposed to know what you're communicating? What are they supposed to focus on? Are you thinking about that? And just asking those questions rather than stating it as a judgment on this is good or bad art.
Yeah, right or wrong. Yeah.
Right. And also, sometimes more than one focal point in an art piece is not, the end of the world because it moves your eye across the page. So it just, I don't know.
Yeah,
that was my
more
main argument
Hieronymus
against
Bosch or something like that, and see if they can find the focal point there.
I guess for me, Trey, did you want to have any thoughts?
I'm good. You can go on.
Yeah, I guess for me, so my first thought was about thinking about the non-binary community because that's something I've recently been experiencing.
Oh,
where
yes.
and this is all from my experience, like online, so this may be completely off. But from what I've seen, there isn't so much of a gatekeeping or elitism problem, and I feel like people really emphasize that like you don't need to pass or present a certain way for your identity to be valid, and a lot of like cheerleading and like encouraging people to be who they are. And I think maybe the potential difference there is that because there isn't like an outside, whatever, outside communities aren't trying to appropriate trans identities to be cool or anything like that, and it's still, the culture is basically built around trying to erase those identities. So because there is that very real like physical and emotional threat, that the community is so supportive to each other. Obviously there are flame wars and stuff that like, I mean, you just have to bring up ContraPoints, and
I was just going to ask if I got you into ContraPoints at all.
Yeah, you're going to get some people who have some strong feelings, but in general, like I don't, from the conversations I've had with people, that hasn't been a thing. And with paganism, I think there's more of that going on. And I think part of that is because you do see like witchy clothing it becoming popular, or like witch kits being sold at Sephora or whatever.
Oh God, yeah.
And people get pissed about that. But even then, in general, and again, maybe this is just because I surround myself with these people, I still hear, whatever, bring in the new witches, give them a place to grow and learn and get educated, rather than saying like, whatever. You thought burning sage made you a witch, and so get the fuck out of here. Like, I don't see that happening a lot.
Yeah, no, and the reason that I don't have a problem with that kind of thing is because, there are so many other bigger religions that are put at the forefront every single day. So to push forth something that I stand behind personally, and bringing that a little bit more to the accessible to public, I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, you're normalizing something. But that's
exactly.
that's part of the thing, is there still is a moral panic around Satanists and pagans and witches and non-binary identities and stuff. And that's a very real thing, whereas that doesn't really exist for goths anymore, right? We're kind of past that now.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are certain places that is definitely an issue, but overall,
I was going to say yes and no, but you're right. Overall, it's the mainstream as far as that's concerned is pretty blasé to the whole thing. It's simply another of a myriad of choices that one can make in life, and it's whatever.
Yeah. Well, but on that, there was a point when I was pregnant, mind you, and my hair was short and not dyed black like it is currently even, and I was walking around in like a blue tank top with my tattoos exposed, and I was at a thrift shop with my mom, and this little kid runs up to me. I mean, a little kid, like the age of my daughter, like maybe 5 or 6, looks up at me, literally gasps, and then runs screaming back to their mother halfway across the store. So I mean, goth is maybe not quite completely normalized in the more rural parts of America, but I would like to think it's a lot more acceptable these days.
I saw somebody the other day that said they were out somewhere, and a little kid asked their dad, why does that person dress so strange? And the dad said, you need to mind your own damn business, to their kid.
Oh, that's great.
Which I thought was hilarious.
Oh.
Yeah, but so I did want to touch on this too, because going back to that point of like this idea of goth being a cool thing.
Yeah.
Aytakks wrote an article on the Belfry recently, which I'll link to, so anyone who wants to read it can go read it. Basically saying that, people who ask if they can be goth without liking the music on Reddit, because there have been a few of those posts, are just because people want to be cool and they don't want to be told that they have to listen to music to be goth, because they just want to be hip and whatever. And I have an issue with that because I think if people are asking or opening themselves up to criticism on a web forum about whether or not they can be considered goth, I think it's more likely that they are pursuing that community aspect that's synonymous with goth rather than trying to be cool. Because if they were just going to be trying to be cool, they were just going to do it and say they were anyway, and not like try to integrate themselves into that community of people and tell them what to do. And I think what I see happen a lot of times is someone will ask the question, and someone who's been a goth for like 20 years and has seen that question a million times will give this defensive and blunt answer that is not helpful, and then the original person that posts it gets defensive, and it just kind of
inflates
turns
from
into
there.
a shit show like it usually does. And so go ahead.
I think the main thing with the trying to be cool is less that they're invading spaces, goth spaces, and then trying to be cool for doing that. I think it's more they are making a claim in a public space that they are goth, and that very claim is what makes them cool, and the people that rubs the wrong way are like, you're not even goth. So it's not that they're taking time to learn the scene. They are just, as you said, they're just claiming it. But because they're claiming it in a public forum, be it YouTube, Tumblr, Reddit, whatever, the whole world is public forums online. That's where it rubs people the wrong way, because it's clear to a lot of people who are involved and, passionate about the scene that no, you're not goth. And so the question is, why are they even pretending to be? And I think Aytakks has a point in his article in that, maybe there's some cachet outside of goth circles about being in this sort of ultra subculture that makes them cool, and they're trying to take that value into their regular life without necessarily caring what the subculture itself thinks of them.
Well, the other part of my response was I think as a community we can do better to at least try initially to be you do need to enjoy the music, but if what kind of music do you like right now, let me see if I can find you some recommendations, kind of thing. So that we can create paths to getting into the community. And I know Aytakks as well is all on board with providing that information as well, so I'm not trying to throw him under the bus.
But also, I do think that there's a certain aspect that should be, maybe the classic goth bands don't need to be people that you absolutely worship, but I do think that it's maybe something that you should at least kind of look into a little bit, so that you kind of get a grasp for the history of the scene. But at the same time, I don't think it's...
Yeah, I think without question.
A new kid coming into the goth scene, like my child, she's not going to be interested in ministry. I to be honest, I really doubt that.
Right, yeah.
But
it's pretty far removed from her experience.
I'm not into Ozzy Osbourne like my parents were, so... But I do think it's important to kind of know where the roots come from, even though you don't have to currently prescribe to them.
Yeah, I mean, so I do think music is important, and I do think that's a big part of what it means to be goth. I just get off the train when people are saying goth music is the only thing that matters, and that's it. Because
absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to
Billie Eilish with my kid. She likes it.
Yeah, there you go.
Nothing wrong with Billie Eilish.
My kid loves
really
her,
good.
and so that's what got me listening to it. And I was, she's not bad. She's not bad at all. I'll sing along with it,
Well, it's funny that people will say, I'll see people say music is the only thing that matters. You don't have to dress goth to be goth. You just have to listen to the music. But then they get pissed when they see someone dressing goth that isn't goth.
Yeah.
If it doesn't matter, then it should be irrelevant how people dress.
Or the other way around, when they're at the club and get all pissed off when someone strolls in with a backwards baseball cap and some baggy pants.
Yeah, Bruce Lord coming in with all his goth knowledge, looking like a fucking sports douchebag. I love you, Bruce. Bruce outgothed me by 4 times in goth points on the Gothquisition episode, so I have to give him a little shit for being cooler than me. But yeah, I mean, so basically, like, I think there's a bunch of stuff tied into the music that comes with it, and I think that's been there since the 70s and the 80s, and and like this that question I get, like, well, what if I can't dress goth for work, or I can't afford goth clothes, and does that mean I can't be goth even though I listen to goth music, if goth is more than just goth music? And like the question doesn't even make sense to me, because like my perception of what it means to identify with something or to be a person is a multitude, and that we are complex, right? We can hold distinct ideas and mutually exclusive behaviors within ourselves. That's why you can deeply love someone and also be deeply unsympathetic to them in certain circumstances, because we're not these static monolithic things. We're constantly in a state of becoming and enacting what we've become. So like my answer to that question is always, yeah, of course. Like, it's contextual. It depends on the situation. It's like job dress codes are not a problem slotting into the idea of goth as a number of elements coming together, because it is contextual and because we are contingent and coextensive and all that. But anyway, that's going to get into philosophy stuff, which is not where I'm going.
Which the show is never about, so we can never do that on this show.
But I did want to say, talking about the fashion thing, I saw this thread. It was a snip. I don't know where this is from, if this is Reddit or Tumblr or wherever, but there were these 3 comments that I thought were really cool. So somebody said, let's take a moment, and this is to kind of illustrate how fashion and aesthetic is relevant to goth in general, and like the sense of goth identity kind of thing. So somebody said, let's take a moment to appreciate how goth culture has allowed many closeted trans people the opportunity to wear jewelry, makeup, and nail polish under less scrutiny from the cishet world. And then the next person said, or conversely, combat boots, waistcoats, Oxford shoes, ties, stud belts, wallet chains, and other traditionally masculine accessories. And then the last comment was, the total and utter blurring of the gender binary is honestly the style's biggest source of power. We got dudes in corsets and gals in tuxes, and some folks wearing both at the same time. And I really like that. I think it illustrates the relevance of fashion to goth as a culture, because it's not just a music genre. It is a culture of people with values and ideals and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, from my experience, I talked about this a bit on the Patreon vlogs. I don't know if I talked about it on the podcast, but like it's kind of true for me in 2 ways, that the experimenting with gender presentation before I even knew what that was a thing for me when I was goth, or getting into goth as like a Christian, conservative Christian. And then on the other end, I did get shit from people for being goth when I was wearing a skirt or wearing makeup or whatever, but comparing that to experimenting with gender in a way that is more femme and like puts that label of genderqueer on it, I get more recurrent and worse reactions. My parents had a hard time with me being goth, but adding the gender stuff to it has like just completely blown that ship up. So I do think that it is cool that goth can function as this recognizable collection of like ephemera that people can experiment with under the umbrella of goth and kind of learn about themselves that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, hanging out with the goth theater kids was also my first introduction to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which then kind of snowballed from there in my knowledge of gender bending. I suppose that's not the right word, is it? Knowledge. Fluidity. Yes.
Yeah. That was a big Yeah, I missed out on the train for that because I just don't like musicals, but I know that's like a big touchstone for a lot of people.
I don't typically like them, but
if you really want to get into it, you have to go to a live show.
Yeah,
and it's more about the spectacle and the community than it is necessarily about the musical itself.
Sure.
Yeah, I also ended up getting to watch the person playing Frankenfurter for the Rocky Horror do their makeup, and they started out as very blue collar Joe Schmo, and then they did their makeup, and I was in awe. It was a complete transformation. It was for
it's amazing what people can do.
In their case it was drag, but it was that was another big wake up call for me. For gender is not what defines you.
It's just a social
it's a social construct.
Yeah. Gender is performative. It's a performance.
Yeah. Much like goth.
Yes.
So I want to talk about, I want to do a quick year recap of 2019, but I have one last bone to pick because this has really been stuck in my craw, to use a phrase I've never used in my life. And it's, this is going to come up on a future show, I think, but it's going back to this idea of reducing goth to music. I think one of the things I've been thinking about this last couple of weeks is that I think part of the fear that drives that idea is commodification, which in theory is this mainstream fascination with goth as an authentic expression of identity. So the assumption is that there is no authentic identity in the mainstream, and therefore they want to incorporate goth and other authentic identities into their lives to give them some form of realness. But part of my problem with that line of thinking goes back to this idea of abstracting groups of people and thinking of the mainstream, and goths do this all the time, but thinking of the mainstream as this cohesive, discrete entity that is the same for all people everywhere. And what you're doing is reducing lived experience to an intellectual exercise, and that decontextualizes the diversity in the lives and the complexity of a whole group of people. And I think that's part of why I don't think commodification is anything to worry about. But I also found this quote from Mick Mercer that kind of illustrates the propinquity, or the close relationship between goth music and fashion, which I thought was pretty cool, because I think this is from '96, but I don't remember exactly. But he said, how many of what we may reasonably refer to as goth bands have used on stage what we can only describe as wholly manufactured images, which are essential to their art? About 100%. The imagery, totally dramatic, has to be there. It is a facade, true, but a glorious one. Why else do the audiences constantly find it necessary to plunge or wriggle into skin-tight nothings, or to encase themselves in voluminous cascades of cloth?
Yep.
So that's my little.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. My main issue with the whole, I will use terms like the mainstream or something as a
shorthand
point of reference or a shorthand. I try to avoid using it as an epithet or a way of demonizing people, because I find just that general sort of, like you say, abstracting a group of people and making them some sort of monolithic thing it's just another form of othering. And I don't think othering in general is healthy. I think people are people, and we should be inclusive, and everybody should view themselves as part of the same group, including our differences, because it's our differences that make us interesting to one another. And when you are so busy just focusing on what makes them and different from you, that leads to a very unhealthy dynamic and an unhealthy view of society and the world around you.
All right, so we've got a whole bunch of other stuff to talk about. We're not going to get to it, but let's. I want to do a year in review next, because I think that'll be fun, since it is the first episode of year in review.
I heard urine as well. So
urine.
I'm like,
How much whiskey have I drunk? That may be the problem here.
Oh,
I've been drinking well, so we're talking a very pale color right now.
Oh, you've been drinking well. Well, what?
Well water, preferably.
Well, water. Oh, okay.
I like my bacteria.
Well, water is one thing, but I thought you were
Trey
meant like whiskey or vodka or
Or what does Dracula say? I don't drink alcohol. Or what is something like that? I don't know.
Something like that, yes.
That new show, have you both seen the new Netflix?
Oh yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no.
Well, it was like
it takes me a while to get Netflix shows because I don't have Netflix.
So
no, it's I don't drink wine. That's what it is.
I really enjoyed the first episode, and then the second episode was I enjoyed it, and the third episode I was kind of like, I'm very fascinated though by seafaring stories.
Yeah, I loved everything about episode 2.
Yeah,
and episode 3 wasn't the same, but I like conceptually the idea of bringing traditionally Dark Ages, Gothic situations into the modern day. I like that. Whatever word I'm looking for is. I like that scenario, putting those two things together. So I thought it was fun, but I understand.
I think you're looking for anachronism.
Yeah, anachronism, contrast, maybe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fish out of water. A Yankee in King Arthur's court.
So I'll let you guys go first. I'm interested to hear, how did you feel about 2019? What were there any bands or events or community things that stood out to you? Like, how do you feel about Goth as a whole? What kind of stuff did you get into? That kind of thing.
You meant year in review. This is not what I heard.
Year in review. This is the segment of the show where we're gonna golden shower me.
That's all I can hear.
Great.
At first. Oh goodness. Let's see, what shows did I go to this year? There was Suicide Commando, I think. Grendel. Pigfest was unfortunate this year. Yeah, but so it was really interesting too. There was the Grendel show that we had at the Star Theater. They toured with Glass Apple Bonsai and also Esoteric. I love all of those bands, but Esoteric I was the most excited to see. Because
really,
yes, because way back in the day when I was first starting to watch YouTube regularly,
okay, yeah,
the Goblin Queen was one of my favorite YouTubers, and then she quit doing YouTube, and now that is her band.
Yeah.
So I got to sit there almost the entire night on the patio of the Star Theater, just chatting with her.
Oh, that's great!
And it was incredible.
That's great.
Yes.
I love her. Every time I've had an interaction with her, she's just been lovely.
She's a pure Raylight. I wouldn't say replicate, but I would always wanted to make people feel the way that she does. Her whole being is just so you feel like you've known her for years, and that she's someone so comfortable to be around. And that's what I want to recommend.
Yeah, Trey, what do you got?
I mean, that's hard. I pay too much attention to politics to be that positive about things.
Ooh.
But I'm not going to go into that too much, but that's a sort of major distraction that kind of dominates the year, especially given we're in election season now and the whole campaign. So there was a lot of that I paid attention to that kind of soured me on things in general. But as far as stuff that went on, I went to a fair amount of concerts. I mean, I'm not by any means a heavy concert goer. It's usually, a bunch of people are going to this concert and they invite me along. Maybe I'll head out and check it out. So I did enjoy Cold Waves. That was a lot of fun. Just getting out to regular club nights when I can, though I've been kind of in hibernation mode here in winter and intending to go to club nights, and then the night happens and I just don't feel like leaving the house. So that's been happening a lot lately in the last few months. The part of that's been aggravated by we had a large project at work that really, really took a lot of energy that I just wasn't feeling doing anything outside of that after doing weeks and weeks of, like 12-hour days pretty continuously. So I wasn't getting out and doing things. A lot of what I've been focusing on this year is, kind of playing more with musical ideas, and been shopping gear. Still my perennial search for a new piano, but that above and beyond that, many other things that I've been shopping around, musically speaking. And then debating getting into actually making something rather than just collecting the tools to make it and not actually producing anything with it, which is my life.
Ooh, yeah.
We'll see if that ends up happening, because, like I said, my life is the collection and not the realization oftentimes.
Yeah.
But, it's been an interesting year. I guess fun adventure, exploring semi-new things, but mostly just hanging out with friends, getting out to movie nights and game nights and stuff like that with various friends has been sort of the highlights of my year. But that's what I really like to focus on, when I'm invited to just hang out with people.
Yeah, that's my favorite. It's just a nice chill weekend where I can hang out on the couch with my friends and chat and drink a couple of beers.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely my favorite.
So I speaking of urine reviews, so I actually wrote a article for this Obscura Undead zine that just came out, which I highly recommend everybody go pick up. I will link it in the show notes, but that whole zine was about reflecting on 2019, and there were a lot of interesting perspectives, and it really kind of gave me that feeling of excitement and pride around the goth community, which was really cool. So that was something really neat. I think I was really happy to see the continued release of new music, new goth music, and not just a specific genre either, but a whole gamut of sounds, which I thought was really cool. Unless I know, actually DJ Azzy coined the term goth wave. I believe it was them who did it. But the kind of, she passed away, dark wave meets goth rock sound. That's been a big thing, but I think we've seen a lot of other bands producing different kinds of music as well.
Yeah.
And it was cool to see classic bands from the 80s touring and doing one-off shows and putting out new albums or re-releasing albums and that kind of thing. So that's been amazing. And 2019 was so good. I keep kind of waiting for the party bus to crash.
Yeah.
For the post-punk revival thing to die out. And I was actually thinking about the early 2000s the other day, and how there's I feel like there was a big reliance as far as the scene goes on media representation. So film characters, cartoons, comics, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I also feel like it was kind of dwindling as far as people that the amount of people that were goths and the amount of nights and stuff that people could go to. And I think a big factor in that was just that there was not a lot of goth music being made. So I'm really happy to see everything that's going on now, because I kind of remember the dark ages, and maybe I'm remembering that wrong, but it seemed like the dark ages to me. One of the trends that I really, really loved this year was seeing more and more queer people and people of color producing music and DJing and being visible in general. And a lot of my favorite albums this year are from marginalized communities that put out new records. And I think that's fantastic, because especially I do think that has been a problem historically for goth. Where if you look at the compilations from the past, it's 80% male artists, or even I was flipping through some McMercer books, and it's all of the artist photos in there are mostly white dudes, and then all the fan photos are white women.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice to see that that's changing.
Yeah.
So on that note, I did throw together a few albums and EPs that I really, really enjoyed this year, 2019. So in no particular order, my list was the Ire, who put out a demo that I thought was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Polyverso put out a full length called Antagonista. Otzi put out a new EP called Part-Time Punk Sessions. Nox Novacula put out a album called Hitchhiker. Pawns had a new EP, Moments of Faith. Minuet Machine had a new album. And I was actually one of the bands I saw live last year. That was a real highlight. It was really nice to see them play. And then she passed away. I know everybody has talked about that album, but I wasn't a huge fan of their first album, and the new one really kind of did it for me. So I really, really enjoyed that album. And then I think the last recommendation I had was the band Secret Shame, who just put out an album a couple months ago.
Album review.
The album we are reviewing this month is by Nuevo Testemento. They are a cold wave post-punk trio from LA, and their debut EP Exposure released on Avant Records on November 1st, 2019. So I'm going to play a track from the album, and it is going to be track 2, Cascade. towards the end of the year, we just ended up having 2.5 hour shows anyway. So I'm like, well, let's see if we can shorten these up a little bit, and like maybe do a little more editing where I cut out a little bit more, just so try and pack in all the interesting stuff and make it a little shorter. So we'll see how that goes.
I've had problems with that myself. With YouTube. Yeah, with doing YouTube videos where it's like I've got an entire hour and a half that I need to condense down into 15 to 20 minutes. Ouch.
Yeah. I don't know how good you are at video editing. I mean,
not very.
I started doing it before I did Cemetery Confessions. I was doing a YouTube thing because I thought that's where I would be a good place to get my message out. But the amount of time I spent editing was just abysmal. And I mean, editing these shows still takes a while, but I feel like it's easier for me to do with just audio. Yeah,
because you're not having to sync video with it. It's become so daunting that I've not put out. I have 2 episodes filmed of Portland Undead, and I haven't edited them in like a month.
I mean, that's like, I know we were skipping over this, but that's part of the thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, is just it's like I see a lot of people, we have a really creative community, and a lot of people try to start content production and because they have a bunch of great ideas, and then you get into it and it's like, holy shit, this is actually a lot of work.
Yeah, it's like a full-time job.
You get through. Yeah.
Oof, and I already have a full-time job, and I'm a mom, so it's rough.
And if you're looking to like build a community of people or monetize it or anything like that, like the business consultants I've heard talk about this will say it takes about 2 years before you get that. It took me, I think it was 4, maybe 5 years before I finally felt like Cemetery Confessions was a thing that had a community of people that became friends and were passionate about the same thing, and we had this group going. And for a long time, it just kind of felt like I was throwing my best ideas out into the world and nobody gave a shit. And it's really hard to do that, especially because it takes so much work.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm always like,
also I'm feeling that too, because it's also really hard to keep people to commit to not only show up to the scene, but also, put on their makeup and spend the time doing their hair and picking out an outfit. And it, like I've had more dropouts than I have interviews, like last minute dropouts. And I'm like halfway through my makeup and I'm like, damn it.
Yeah, that is a benefit of audio, but I have had a number of people that the day of are like, oh yeah, no, that's not gonna work. Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, that's why I'm always telling people, if you find something you like that's made by somebody in the scene, whether it's music or jewelry or whatever, and you've got a few bucks, fucking buy it, because there's so much work that went into that you don't even know about.
Well, it's also years of learning that craft, like it's the years, it's the skill, it's the study that it's taken them to get to that point.
Cool. So does anybody want to share their thoughts on the album, or I can share mine? Or
I'm a really bad guest. I haven't listened to it.
Oh no! All right.
I'm so sorry. Was it in the brief?
Let's talk about Loverland then.
Was it in the brief? Was it?
It was. No. It was, but that's fine. That's okay. That's all right. That's fine. Just
there it is. Yes, I see it. It's at the very bottom. Oh no.
We're gonna have to do this episode again next Monday.
I mean, we could.
We'll wait for you to listen to it, and then we'll.
All right. So I listened to this a couple of times. I was kind of going back and forth listening to this and that Loverland album that you've been trying to denounce this whole
show. Loverload. Yeah, it's all the stage fright. It's. I'm like, no, don't listen to me sing.
So yeah, I was been kind of going back and forth between the two. Well, you're really buried in the mix, so we're not really hearing you sing that much. That's the great thing about shoegaze.
Right.
So yeah, I was bouncing back and forth between the two albums. In general, I like them both, but to get on this album, it was a good nostalgia trip for me. It was very reminiscent of the stuff I was first listening to back in the 90s when I was just starting to get into goth. So that was the biggest thing that hit me as soon as I started turning it on. Was, oh wow, this is very much that sort of 90s goth kind of aesthetic, which was nostalgic, but as I've said on many occasions, when it's some kind of music that's reminiscent, perhaps too reminiscent of something from the past, it loses my interest real quickly. So I did enjoy it. I thought it was really good. But a lot of it kind of blurred together and just made me think of other bands that, oh, I should go listen to this band. And oh, I should go listen to this band that I remember from way back when. So that was kind of my feel. The tracks that kind of stood out for me, for some reason, I really gravitated to Gold, which was, I think, track 3. And I think it was probably just because it had sort of a catchy hook and this lovely little rhythmic or musical or melodic harmonic shift in the verses that was just ear-catching. So that one kind of grabbed me. And then the one right after it grabbed me just because it was different. But it was one of those tracks that's just like, this is an intro. It's really cool. And then it remains an intro for the full 2.5 minute length and never actually goes anywhere. Yeah. I'm like, oh, wow, this is a different change of pace, but then nothing really happens. And then they go back to kind of the same sort of 90s goth sound, which, like I said, I enjoyed. It was a fun nostalgia trip, but it wasn't anything really revelatory or anything that really grabbed me and made me, oh, I want to get into this band because this band is something new and something interesting. It just made me want to listen to old bands.
Yeah. So my thoughts, the first two, this will be a little funny. The first two tracks I felt were great. I thought the melodies were really solid. There was a pretty classical dark wave feel to it. Like, it reminded me of like Frozen Autumn and She Passed Away. There's a really catchy synth with the thin haunting guitar. And the lyrics I felt really added to the atmosphere of that as well. I loved the droning sound to the vocals. It was really kind of like that ideal sound for a smoke-filled goth dance floor kind of thing. The third track, funny enough, to me it was so generic and forgettable that every time I listened to it, I got to the end and I realized I had been doing something else and didn't remember anything that had just happened. So I don't know what it was about that song, but like it just could not hold my attention. And then I felt the same way with the one after that, because it was like, oh yeah, this is an intro to something. And it's both of those started out, I was like, oh cool, so this is like really atmospheric and interesting. But then I don't know, I couldn't pin it down. It just didn't click with me. And the one after that, I really like the idea of appropriating a hymn or the idea of a hymn and then recontextualizing it.
Maybe call it her
for something perverse or HYMN. But I just don't think there was anything there for me. The fifth track mirrored the first two, more of a dancey track, something for the dance floor, and then the last track reminded me more of like Cellophane, and that was actually probably my favorite from the album. It was less dancey, but more spooky, I guess. And I love dancey goth music, but you will always win me over with heavily atmospheric, moody music. So out of 5, I'd probably give it a 3.5.
So I'd probably go with 2.5 to 3, somewhere in there. Good, right. Above average, but nothing really that exciting. I mean, if you like that sort of 90s goth sound, at least that's what it evoked for me the most. Like some of the stuff that Project Records was releasing, or Sarah for like The Shroud, some early Switchblade Symphony when they were smaller, maybe. Then give it a listen. I think it'll be a fun trip, especially if you kind of started in the scene around that time like I did.
Yeah. All right, that means it's time for Sinister Suggestions.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
All right, so Sinister Suggestions is the part of the show where we recommend something that we have been enjoying the last month. It could be a book, a movie, a comic, a album, a product, whatever.
So I've got a couple things. They're actually both TV shows that have little to nothing to do with goth whatsoever. But one of which my parents got me into, and then one of which a friend got me into. So the main one my parents got me into was a show out of Netflix called Sex Education.
I watched the first episode of that.
It's great. Watch through the rest. It's a really good show that deals with a lot of really interesting topics as far as social environment and things like that. And it's kind of coming of age, but not kind of in the cheesy way. But I really enjoyed it. I totally binged the first season, and I'm trying to find a way to binge the second at this point. But I guess the trope is, for those who haven't watched it, is your main character is just going into, it's a British show, just going into like first year high school-ish. I don't know the exact year, but just entering this high school environment. His trope is that he's got some sexual dysfunction, and his mother is a sex therapist. And so there's some tension around that, but then he gets involved because he's grown up in a very sex-positive environment with a sex therapist. As a mother, he's got all this knowledge, and so this other person in the school decide that they're going to start a sort of sex and relationship therapy within the school. Mm-hmm. But it deals with a lot of things around sexuality and gender, and very openly addresses unusual sexualities. It doesn't bring out like homosexuality or transvesticism or anything like that as a trope to trot around. It's just kind of, it's a thing. It happens and people talk about it. And it's a very non-judgmental conversation. So I've really been enjoying that. And then the second thing that a friend of mine got me into is an anime, My Hero Academia, My Hero Academia.
I've heard of this one,
which I loved.
Yeah.
I've also heard of like a million people talk about it and never watched it.
Same.
I mean, that was kind of my thing too, is I wasn't really that interested in it. It was like, it's interesting. And the person that got me into it, she's a big comic book fan, and I'm not as big into comic books. So, superheroes, I like some of it. It can be fun. I mean, I guess as a secondary recommendation, I like things like The Boys, because I like subversions of tropes too.
Right.
Though that one didn't necessarily grab me as strongly as Hero Academia did. And it's not that Hero Academia is a subversion, but just the way it plays with superhero-dom and the concept of a world where it's unusual for someone to not be a superhero, and that's something to note is, oh, I'm someone who doesn't have a superpower. And that makes them odd. And I thought that was just an interesting world, and just the way they develop the characters and the way they talk about some of the moral lessons and whatnot. I just find it really engrossing and really enjoyable.
Oh, there's 77 episodes.
There is.
Oh, goodness.
But it's free to watch on Crunchyroll. So
yeah, I do have a Crunchyroll subscription too.
Well,
but I watch like cute slice of life anime to make me feel like I'm happy. I've been rewatching Non Biori a bunch of times because it's just a bunch of cute schoolgirls in rural Japan with no real concerns other than what are we going to do for fun today? And it's like, oh yeah, maybe the world isn't on fire and everyone's going to die and I can be happy for like 5 seconds.
I mean, My Hero Academia has its aspect of that. It's got that sort of cute fun element as well. It's not all serious doom and gloom.
Yeah. No, I do really like the doom and gloom aspect of anime, though. the most populars are Attack on Titan and One Punch Man. Yeah,
which I loved. Yeah.
Those are both great.
I also liked One Punch Man.
One Punch Man was so fucking good. Yeah.
If you like One Punch Man, there's a lot of One Punch Man kind of y things in My Hero Academia.
Okay.
I'm also trying to get into Mob Psycho 100, which is by the same guy who did One Punch Man.
Okay.
So I only watched like the first episode of that, and I haven't dove into it yet.
Well, I think one of my favorite anime, it's from like over 10 years ago, I think at this point, but it's also coincidentally the very first anime that came out in 1080p is Ergo Proxy. And I'm very much an aesthetic person. So I love the art style, but also the contrast of going from this nice, clean, white-walled office space to like the very next scene is this old, dingy apartment complex that's completely run down, and there's stains on the wall, and it just I was amazed with that anime when it came out. And I didn't even have a device to watch it on in 1080p, and it was still incredible to me. Also, a classic that I found incredible, and again, it's from a while back, but Serial Experiments Lane. Speaking of like the doom and gloom, you know.
Yeah, that one's right in line with Ergo Proxy. Those are definitely, I can understand you liking both of those.
I adore those. But speaking of the things that I've been watching in the last month or so, Dragula on Netflix. Only recently.
Don't know what
it's kind of like RuPaul's Drag Race, but for the freaks. So, like, for instance, in season 3, which is the most recent season on Netflix, there's only season 2 and 3 available on Netflix. But in season 3, there's one drag king who, like, dumped a bunch of live insects and maggots all over themselves, like, for their stage show. And, like,
nice.
Wow, that was so cool.
So my question about, before you move on from Dragula.
Yes.
Is it less catty than Drag Race? Because there's a lot of Drag Race where it's people cutting each other down.
Yeah,
that's the part that really bothers me about it.
There is a little bit of cattiness, but there does seem to be more of a sense of togetherness with this show.
Good. I might actually be interested in watching.
Yeah, but there is aspects where someone's being kind of, shitty, and they get called out for it, So there's a little bit of drama, but it's nothing like Drag Race was.
Okay.
Yeah, like go back to Party City where you belong. There's nothing quite that extreme on Dragula.
Okay.
But also I've been listening to this band. I'm not sure, are they Russian maybe or from the Ukraine? It's Kompromat, and it's Kompromat, and it's formed by Vitalik and Rebecca Warrior. I'm not sure who those people are, but it's their immediate Google about section of them. They are kind of described between Einstein and Newboten and Crash Course in Science.
Okay, you got my attention.
I don't know. It's just when I'm listening to particularly, I think it's the name of the song that I like the most from them is Possession. And when I'm listening to that song, I just kind of get this like overwhelming sense of like go forth and do things. Like I can do it, like it kind of evokes a sense of power. Yeah. And I've really been into music that makes me feel motivated in the last couple of months. and they definitely fall into that.
My 2 recommendations, I will keep them brief. The first is a band, Double Echo released a new album called Burning in Blue, which is, dare I say, a masterpiece. I love every single track off that album. So that's something I've been listening to a lot. And then, stupid suggestion, but if you haven't seen The Witcher, you should go
I love
watch
it so much.
I love everything about it. I can't get enough of it. I'm super excited to see what they do with the next season. If they get a bigger budget and they can fix some of the issues that were present in the first season. But I mean, it's so good. The monster hunting is great. The little like interactions between characters are great. The set pieces are fun, and the humor is probably my favorite part. Because it's so dry and sarcastic.
The bard. I think he's my favorite character. He's just it's such a serious
fantastic
show, and then he comes in and he's like, "Hey, what's up?"
Yeah. I'm gonna rub chamomile on your lovely bottom. Yeah. It's great. So especially if you're a fan of high fantasy, if you're a fan of high fantasy, you've already watched it. So it's kind of like whatever, but yeah, those are my recommendations. So that is it. Krystina, why don't you let us know where we can, again, find your stuff on the internet?
So the most up-to-date thing that I am working, my current project is my YouTube channel under the name Rigor Amortis, like rigor mortis, but with, amor as in love.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so cute. That's funny.
Sexy corpse. I love it. It's cute. Yeah.
So what I'm doing there is I'm doing a show called Portland Undead, which is quite like this, but in video format. And people local to me. So people who influence the scene quite heavily here. Like I just did an interview with Barbie Saint, who is the bassist for Die Robot. So anyway, and
I love, and may I say, I've watched all the episodes. I think they're fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I love seeing the live interaction because that is a level of social acuity above what I have. I like being able to have the distance of just audio, so I don't have to feel socially awkward. But it's very, very good. Everyone should check it out. There will obviously be links in the show notes.
Rigor.amortis at Instagram. And then my music for Loverload can be found at, we just had that link up a little bit ago. Loverload.bandcamp.com/releases. And
beautiful.
That project is currently on hold. Nothing bad happened with that. It was just I started getting a little overwhelmed and needed to take a step back for a little bit from that. Hopefully we will have more come out in the future, but it might still be a hot minute for that. And that's about it right now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking time to come and chat with us. Yes, it was a lovely experience.
Yes, absolutely. I had a good time. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Krystina, thank you again so much for joining us for this episode of Cemetery Confessions. Just like that, our hiatus is finally over. We're getting back into the swing of things. And actually, now would be a good time to mention Patreon. If you missed us for the last month and a half, but we're on our Patreon, you were getting almost weekly updates and videos to hold you over. We also had a Patreon-only hangout that we do every year during the hiatus, where I open up a Skype room for everyone on Patreon and hang out for 4 or 5 hours. That was a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do another one sometime later this year. But if any of that sounds interesting, or you would like to get stuff like early access to episodes, be able to watch and listen to a live stream of the episodes as they're recorded, get personal vlogs from me, get exclusive merchandise sent to you, that kind of thing, you can head over to patreon.com/cemeteryconfessions and take a look at what kind of rewards we have for you there. Before I let you know what we have coming up in a couple weeks, let's thank those Patreon members for their patronage. This is a reward tier that you too can get by going to patreon.com/cemeteryconfessions. And of course, because I love all of the patrons and they are what keeps the show going. It's not me. I mean, I have a little bit to do with it, but it is their passion, their support that keeps Cemetery Confessions going episode after episode. So our supporters for December at the founders level are Esmeralda, Abigail, SJ, Samantha Dietz, Cadaver Kelly, Jason, and Samantha. Thank you all. At the Nocturnal Council level, we have Krystine, Nephilim and Corruptus, Skullgirdle, Natalie, DJ Azzy, Mike Mess, Dawn, Fifth Dream, Amy, William, Eternal Winter, Sav, Jacob, Michelle, Jen, Sebastian, Esther, Hayshaker, and Paul. And at the Crow's Call level, we have Isabel, Dom, Marco, Angel, Alex, Kennedy, Anne, Bronwyn, Heather, Marissa, Becca, David, Alex, Kelly, Dagger Dance, Caroline sometimes, Caroline, Alana, Irene, Susan, Kay, Mark, King Rhinex, Country Fried Goth, Sarah, Jonathan, Wolfie, David, Morgan, Kevin, Ryan, Top Down Tom, Eduardo, Jan, Richard, Gendalis, Isabel, Barnabas, Elizabeth, Jennifer, Kevin, Bruce Lord, Enya, Felina, Keen, Anna, Death Metal Kumbaya, Laurel, The Ghost Pony, Ava, Stuart, Nia, Martin, Myron, Keith, Dry As She, Gateway Goth Events, Morgan, and Cher. What an incredible group of people. And I, of course, didn't mention you can catch almost all of them in our Discord channel, which you do get access to, and can hang out and talk with me if you join Patreon. So thank you all so much. That really, really means a lot. It's wonderful to have you all as friends and supporters of the podcast. So, as I said, in 2 weeks we will be back, and we are going to be talking with Kate of Bone and Busk. Kate is a fashion designer. We're going to be talking about haute couture, runway fashion, high fashion, and the relevance or irrelevance of that community to goth aesthetic. And we're going to be talking about the relevance or irrelevance of goth aesthetic to goth itself. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.